and you can feel the passion. Can't you? I mean, he tears up through it, and he tells some great stories. Some I'm like, I'm sitting in the audience behind the power. I might not want to
going off necking down in the woods and coming back. And, funny.
Just so
they were kids too, right?
But you know, in reflection, I always felt that the way it all came across, he didn't know that he would be gone at the end of the year, but it was almost like his last chance to tell the world about his family and what they did. So it is a great film, but that shows, you know, the commitment. And it was difficult to watch throughout those years with the Colombians and what was going on. Every year we'd have one less grower that would be at one of the shows, you know, and it was difficult because they could sell them so much cheaper. You know, labor is so much cheaper there.
You get 2 dozen roses now for $20.
But they would, I remember at the one time, 60 cents was where they were at. Now keep in mind, one flower, 60 cents. But all the health care had to come out of there, and all the insurance, all of that, and that one little flower. It just wasn't competitive anymore, and yet his staff wanted increases in their medical care and so on, and it just became impossible. And there were times where I know he was funding and putting, because he wanted to keep it going till the end of the year, you know, and it was difficult. It was hard. He felt like he let his grandfather down, but he didn't. It was just the sign of the times.
Watching them tear those greenhouses down was so heartbreaking. I don't know if you drive by there, and the glass just shattered everywhere. And the only thing I could think of
They tried to take it down piece by piece, and Paul went out there and said, you need to understand, that's all glazed in there piece by piece, and they were glazed to stay, and they did, the hazmat company, they came out because of the asbestos around the steam pipes, and Paul looked at them and he said, you won't last 5 minutes in there. It's got to be 110 degrees. This was like in August. And they had the hazmat suits on, and they all went inside. And within 5 minutes, they were coming out and taking off the hoods, and they went in without. They went in without because they couldn't. It was there. It was way too hot. But they realized they had to just bulldoze it. They were built
even
to
want
be
to say
there.
that. I've lived in Clemens for 40 years.
Well, Paul tried to see if there was anyone in California. He sent letters out to a lot of the movie studios to see if they were going to do anything that they might want to implode the greenhouses, you know, for part of the movie. And he also thought it would be fun to do people who live in glass houses and sell a bucket of rocks for the YMCA, and then let people go out there, and you know how we all feel is you get that urge to want to break a window and you never can, but yeah, he thought that would have been kind of fun to do. Yeah, it was fun.
I just feel sorry for the people that are buying the houses in that area now, because they should issue them garden gloves when they're going in their gardening. That glass has got to still be deep into the soil there. Be careful when you stick your hands in there.
And the purification plant that was on the B range, which was on the west side of Clinton River, when they took that down, there's a big concrete, just like you see a purification, you see that little arm going round and round and round. And every once in a while, Paul said, you see big fish, they'd suck the fish up through the piping, you see them jumping in the retention pond. But as Lynn said, they were checked on many times, and they were amazed that that water went 10 times cleaner back out to the river than when they pulled it back out.
Wow, that's the way the business needs to run today.
Yes.
And their heating bill, I always like to tell this story, in January, February, the heating bill could be in excess of $150,000 for 1 month of gas to heat that.
Ooh, that's a lot of roses you gotta sell.
Well, think about it. It's below zero outside, and you got to keep it 60 degrees.
Yeah.
A question, the roses being grown in Colombia and California, Arizona, wherever, are they grown in greenhouses?
Yeah. Now, they don't grow in Arizona. It's way too hot. The California, yes, Northern California. That's why Michigan had so many rose growers, and you'll see carnation growers in the Midwest and so on. You need those cooler nights. You need them. You don't need it to be hot all the time.
Los Angeles would be way too hot.
Yeah, a lot of the growers were in Northern California. California, and everything grows in greenhouses. The only thing it doesn't, like your mums, a lot of your decorative fillers that we have, baby's breath and things like that, status, that grows in the field. But the majority of more delicate flowers are definitely
And
grown.
it's the same for Colombia, same thing?
Yeah, they do. They grow, it's a whole, Paul, I actually have pictures of Paul. It was funny, they couldn't find boots for him because they're real small people. They're real short. And he said his feet killed him because they found the biggest pair of boots for him to go out into the fields with them. They grow some outside, but you really have to control. You really, really do because the intensity of the sun.
But it would seem that because of the winters that we have here, it would be more difficult and more expensive to control this climate than in California.
$150,000 in the winter, can you imagine? I mean, I would many times go at night with Paul if we were out for dinner and he'd want to swing by, and we'd go into the boiler room, and there were 2 boilers, and I remember the first time he said to me, "You want to see how hot it is?" And I'm like, "Sure." So he swings open this little window thing, and I look in there, and it's white. Hot is white. And when it's really, really hot, it's white. And I'm like, "What am I looking at?" And he goes, "What color is it?" And I go, "It's white." And he goes, "It's hot."
Way hot.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But he always, if we were anywhere, we'd always have to stop him. And then I have to tell you, dark, that man knew it. He probably could have done it blindfolded. But I go, "Turn the light on, I can't see anything." He said, "Just take my hand." And you can't see anything. Because, you had a walkway. Because it's just pitch black. I mean, you could hear the clinging and the clanging of the heat running through the pipes. I mean, for the distance, you could just, it's like music, if you will. But yeah, it'd be pitch dark in there. But he always could find his way around. It is amazing.
Is there anything left? Is anything still there, like in terms of, you said the foreman's house on that one side?
All of that, no, on
Is that still
what
there?
we call the B range, which would be the
Go back to
west
the aerial
side
shot.
of Clinton River. I'll show you
Look
it.
at the aerial, all these wonderful buildings.
This
There it
one.
is.
Okay.
That's the other
The
side.
B range, that's here,
Yeah.
over here, and that's the A range,
Okay.
okay? And the retention pond was over here. There was a really cool old English Tudor home that was
Yeah, that was
here.
a gorgeous
And
house.
that was. And this pad you see over here, that was where the apartment building was for the Japanese
Right.
families.
Now you see a sign right here, it says, "Welcome to Rose Garden Estates," and this
Right.
is all a subdivision now.
So along the river here, a lot of
Yeah, the river's
times,
under the trees. They're
people,
there.
the great fishing back there, great fishing.
I heard there was a German beer garden once on this little island here. There was a bridge way over here somewhere to get to it. You can't get to it anymore. But there was a beer garden at one time, they said here.
Paul was hopeful when he sold it. He did not want a shopping center, a Walmart, a Meijer. He felt like, I have to drive by this the rest of my life. I do not want that. He wanted single family on the one side. Of course, when you sell it, you can't tell people what to do. On the A range, he thought it would be beautiful to have condos and put a nice bike path and benches along the river for people to sit. There's huge, huge buck back there. And we could see where his rat would rub against the tree. I mean, it was way out there. And Paul often wondered after the Rose Gardens, where he said, "Wonder whatever happened to that buck, if he would still go back there or not."
This is vacant here, there's nothing
Yeah,
here. In fact,
there's
there's
that-
talk of making it a park, but.
Well, I think the same gentleman that bought both, I think he bought both, because
Oh, okay, so he owns it too,
the
because
gentleman
they're in the
that bought
process
it
of
from
developing back
Paul,
here now.
he lost, yeah, he started, and then when everything went south,
You know what?
yeah, it went back to the bank, and then another gentleman, in fact, Bob Cannon had said to me when the gentleman purchased it, he said, "You're gonna be happy." And I said, "As long as it's not a Meijer or a."
He's doing a nice job, the homes are
Yeah.
quite nice.
Yeah, he's done.
Personally, I would love to see an historic marker right there.
Yeah.
I'd love to start a campaign
Well,
for the
the
historic marker.
Macomb Clinton Library has a beautiful mural on the wall there that shows the Rose Gardens, and it's just sad, because when I see it, it always makes me feel bad, because I'm thinking, oh, too Yeah, they just kind of kept going.
And where was the foreman's house on this?
The foreman's house,
Oh, no.
Oh, up there, okay.
Ah, there it is.
Is it a
Okay.
big square white house?
it was, and then they had built off, like a family room off to the side. My daughter and her friend, the girls lived there when they were gonna shut down. Paul said, why don't you get out of your apartment and move into the house? He said, I can't let you live there for free because my two brothers will want something. But she kept an eye on the house. And we happened to be down south one winter, and she called, and the house, the English tutor house that was over here, it was on fire. The kids were going in there and partying and stuff, and thank goodness she was there. She was able to call. And when she called us, we said, don't call us, call 911. You know, and so that house burned.
Now, is that where that house gone now too?
Yeah, that's all
It's
gone.
gone too.
Yeah. And Grandma's farmhouse was right here. You cannot see all of it, but the house and the barn was right there. And we took the beam from the house it was amazing. Hand-hewn beams that created the foundation of the house, and had pegs, wood pegs.
Wow.
And my dad was a wood carver. And so when we took those, we thought someday we'd build a house and we would put the beam in the ceiling, and it would be the beam from his grandma's farmhouse. But gave the pegs to my dad. But they had been in there so long, they were hard. He couldn't cut them with anything.
Couldn't carve it.
Couldn't
Petrified.
not with a saw. He bent the blade. It was because the house was built in the late 1800s. So the expansion and contraction of water or whatever, it was solid. Yeah. But I said, it's okay, it's still a pin. Yeah.
That's cool.
And then, like I said, there's memorabilia at the historic village.
Clinton Township's historical village inside Moravian Hall. There's a cabinet, and then there's all the memorabilia that she.
There's some of the Japanese things that the family got, and the whistle, and the
Next
knee
time you go
pads,
to the
and
historical
some of the
village.
tools, and that kind
That's the
of
one on Sugar Bush Road?
thing.
No, Clinton Township, not Chesterfield. This is at the corner of Canal and Romeo Plank.
Where the Clinton Township
We have
offices are.
Clinton Township offices are there, the large library is there, and it is right between them.
They've moved several buildings over there. They've done a very nice
We have a log
job.
cabin there, and we have Moravian Hall. We also have the, of course, pergola, the old pergola, and we just got a 2-hole outhouse. Not one, 2. It bonds the family to use the bathroom. So it's a nice little village.
say that a Sears Roebuck catalog.
Yes, there's a few corn cobs sitting in the corner though.
I never quite figured out when I was little, because we used to go out to the farm with my parents, and we thought that was a treat to go out there.
In the outhouse?
We always had to go to the bathroom. We just wanted to go to the outhouse. We thought that was so funny. We never understood. We thought the magazine was there to read, or the catalog was there to read. And it wasn't until later that we say, why don't they change the catalog? It's not what it's for.
But yeah, the village is open on special occasions, and 4th of July they have fireworks there, so it's right there on the grounds of the Clinton Township offices. Nice little area. The cabin there is was moved from just nearby. We believe it was a canal workers' home when they were building the Clinton Kalamazoo Canal in late 1830s. And it was the caretaker, the guy from Greenfield Village that came to look at the cabin, said this was the worst constructed cabin he had ever seen. The guy didn't know what he was doing, but he might have been in a hurry. It was fall. He had to throw up shelter quickly. And he threw that cabin up, and then we have since chinked it with concrete to sort of keep it together. But that was a canal worker's home right at the corner of Canal and Romeo Plank. That was a working canal for 2 full years. All the way from right there, it began right there at the river, right near here, went all the way to Utica. For 2 years, they were running that canal, it was working. And they attempted to go all the way to Kalamazoo with it. That was the same guy who did the Erie Canal. DeWitt Clinton, which is how we got our name, Clinton Township. DeWitt Clinton. He was trying to build a canal across the state. But by 1843, there was a bank panic, and the telegraph had come out, and the Transcontinental Railroad. So they didn't need a canal anymore, and they abandoned it. If you go to Yates, have some cider, and walk along the back trail. You'll see the aqueduct that they were building for the canal. It's back there. There's a few locks still there, still visible. You can see when you take your cider and walk back on the trail. But that's as far as they got on this side of the state, and I don't know how far they got from Kalamazoo area. But that was, the canal road got the name because it was the tow path where the oxen walked, and the canal was right next to the road. So try next time you drive down canal, try and envision where you're driving these oxen, and next to that ditch was the canal. And that went all the way to Utica.
Fascinating history in the
Big
area,
history.
it really is.
Clinton Township, definitely a good place to live.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I tried to grow roses. I planted them and was always bothered by aphids, black spot, leaf spot, mildew. I just wonder, in your situation with the greenhouses, was there ever a situation where a disease attacked the plants and threatened the entire crop?
No, because they were on top of it, because it would have put them out of business, thousands
Yeah.
and thousands of plants. Mildew is always a problem, as I was telling you earlier, in the January, February, March, because you're trying to keep it hot, but the plants give off moisture too, and you sometimes see a little white dusting on the back of the leaf. I mean, it would, I've sent roses back when I had my shop, because once that white dust is there, it turns black, and then they all just curl up. And, you know, people want some foliage on their roses. It's one thing to put it in an arrangement, you can kind of camouflage it with other foliage, but when you had a dozen roses in a vase and all you got is roses and no foliage, it looks kind of, yeah. But no, they had, in fact, it's interesting with pesticides, because through the years, there was many things in the shed when it was off and by, you see the, oh, you got it? Oh, okay, that is the boiler room, come down just a little bit, right in that area, you can't even see it. There was a shed, and that was where all the different pesticides and stuff, so through the years, as the government said, don't be using that anymore, you know, and I can say it because I was a plantscaper and a florist, so there was pesticides, they were taking off the market even for me in the 80s. But when they shut it all down, they had to bring somebody in, because there was stuff in there, you know, like our garage, you just keep putting stuff in front of it.
Yeah.
And there was some stuff back in there that needed to be taken somewhere.
We don't use pesticides
Yeah.
in part of our waters. I use pure vinegar to kill the weeds on my sidewalk.
Yeah,
Pure vinegar, just spray it on. It
Yeah.
dies within a few hours.
yeah.
It's even
It's
faster
so
than
much-
free.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
safer.
and way better than Roundup.
And better than Roundup, yeah.
But that's the thing, I
Pure
always
vinegar.
used to question.
It's
Paul,
cheap too,
because
$2 a gallon.
Pesticides absorb
Cheap.
through us.
Yeah.
But it will kill everything around it too, so don't spray it with grass or plants or anything else. But yeah, plain old
have to be
vinegar.
exposed to, you know,
It's
but
great.
still, to me, we still don't know, and that's why you constantly see things being taken off the market, because more and more they find things that are bad. But yeah, they never had that, thank God. You know, they could isolate a house very quickly by using
What is that,
the shade cloths and
These
stuff.
are interesting, these are great. You have to, when you get a chance, read some of these. What they wrote back then was so patriotic. The enjoyment of flowers, another of man's inalienable rights. This is during the war years, you know, and trying to promote bonds and sales. But I love this, the way they wrote in the headlines. Some of these are amazing. Bond rally, well, this was cute. Little Johnny swiped with mother. Look at that little face. But if you get a chance, come up and read some of these. Her family has saved these all these years. And boy, they sure look old too, don't they? These are from the 40s.
Well, actually, those are Paul's grandfathers.
Wow.
When I was going through things, I said to him, why don't you have these? I was surprised they didn't have some of this up in the office. I would have had it up in the office.
Yeah, let's go. We Americans have been great lovers of flowers, spreading them in great masses over our countryside. Grateful for them in small measure. I mean, I love the way they wrote.
But you're right.
Yeah, they really
That
have
one is
wonderful
beautiful
words.
too. It
That's
talks
my favorite.
so beautifully about why we give roses, and how when the Allies came into other countries, the women and families came out and gave them roses and flowers as a thank you. And wow, it just wow.
Yeah.
really makes you patriotic.
And then more little ads, these were all local little papers. Wherever they are, can you help them home at Easter? And it's Valentine's Day, your day to make his dreams come true, your husband being away at war. I mean, just wonderful ads that they would run in all the local papers. So, and normal, the Mother's Day one is always cute too. Mother's best evidence down through the ages, and it talks about mom, and she wants flowers. And these are just beautiful. So, and now in this time of stress, Mother is the greatest soldier of them all.
Wow.
I love that. So, these are wonderful sentiments, Micki. You even have some of the tissue, didn't you?
I did, well, these are the,
Yeah, these are cool.
these are the wax sleeves that would go on the flowers after they would be braided.
It's like wax paper. It's very
And they
thick.
would be wrapped around the bunch.
And that would wrap, and then you carry that home to your wife.
And they would go by their length.
Look at that. That's so cool. Extra special roses. Still had the area code, so these are relatively recent. These are like near the end.
Extra special was the length. That's what it was. They would go, first was a 12 to 15, and then you had first, extra, and then special, and then extra, special, with it longer in length, yeah.
Wow.
And then they had what they called culls, which for them, they wouldn't sell. I mean, they would.
Like seconds?
Yeah, I'd always say, those are seconds, really?
Yeah.
I mean, they're beautiful, but some people would buy them. You know, if you're gonna do funeral work, hospital work, the stems don't become so important. They were fanatical about stem strength and length. It was very important to them. And you know, it's gotta be able to hold up that flower, because once that opens up, you got, the weight changes on the flower. So
And this talks about the 4 competitions spurring the Rose Gardens to close in 1999, and they dismantled in 01. So there's Paul in the Rose Garden there, what's left of them. So there were big sales, remember that, along
Yeah.
the road, every had people going by where I should have bought one, I didn't at the time, you should have.
I just wished I would have asked him more questions about growing, because, you know, when you have the grower in the house, who needs to ask him anything? And then once, I mean, he'd always tend to them, and then when he passed, I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to ask him a lot. I should have asked him more things.
He
But,
passed away so young.
yeah, he was only 63.
Way too young.
So if you were back in 1943 and you were decorating for Christmas and there were no poinsettias, I think I heard you say, then you might have roses from the rose garden, and would they be in a centerpiece on the table, or?
Are you running, or have you been approved to be in the?
Yeah, I'm in the walk.
You are in the walk?
Yeah.
I started that back in
Did you really?
93.
Oh, well, see, I'm retired and I got into
Here's what's funny.
What street are you on?
Ludwig.
I with Paul, and I asked Paul if I were to get houses to be on the homes tour, would he give me flowers? And my thought was to go to the homeowners and say, we're going to tell your story. Your house is a 43, your house is a whatever era it was. And then I did research on the homes and the architecture and so on, and then to make sure that we were using the proper flowers for that era, because not everything was available. Like what we have today, Australaria, some of these European flowers, we did not have those back then. So then I went to the 5 different florists and said, I will get the flowers donated, would you donate your talent? And then the homeowner gave us some of their antiques and things to use in the arrangement so it would be authentic on the table. So you're on the walk in December?
Yes, and it's just a Christmas walk, it's not really a historic walk, you know? But I said,
But we
I
can
was
make
so
it
done with Christmas as it is, let's just do some fun, you know, let's do 43.
I'm going to give you my card before I leave. I was in the industry for a long time. I'd be happy to help you.
Good.
You know,
We
put that
could do
together.
rationing, we could
And
just
I do
copy
have,
everything.
I have some rationing ticket. I have some things if you want to put some stuff on display.
Yes,
That's 43. I'll share.
And you need to dress proper, you know, we can get you the
Well, that's why I was looking you over.
Actually, this is an 80s, does 40s look.
Right.
Remember, the 80s, they were reproducing a lot of outfits that had the same flare and the same lines of a 40 suit, and this is from the 80s. So if you know what lines to look for, and then of course you get these incredible hats and shoes, and then you can match the look when you're out.
Yes.
He's great. Victorian Trading sells these reproduction shoes, but I love them, and they're very comfortable. So they're all hard to wear. This is my mother's necklace from the 40s.
And I'd be happy to help.
This was hers, and they all wore the things in like 3 strands back then, or, you know, the wrap on the wire. So, oh, and her clip earrings.
Everyone
You have
calls
mom's
me Micki,
earrings
it
on
says
too.
Michelle, and there's my cell phone.
But they all call her Micki.
Everyone calls me Micki.
Oh, Micki, you're so kind. You're so
The only time I ever got called Michelle was when I was in trouble. And Michelle Marie, I might as well just go to my room.
Mothers know the right buttons to push.
Middle name means it's serious trouble.
Does anyone have any other questions for us? Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm just sitting here thinking, in its heyday, did you ship overseas, or what was your geographical area?
They pretty much here in the U.S. They, as Lynn was saying,
Washington,
they did
D.C. during the
shipped
Joe
a
Ford
lot of
administration.
roses to Washington. There were times when even, I can say this, Hawaii had no gardenias, had no stephanotis, and we were shipping to them. They had a bad year, bad season, something happened, I don't know what. But I remember I happened to be in the office when they got the call, and he said, yes, we can. And they said, for how long can you ship? And he said, we'll ship until we don't have any. But they had one whole greenhouse was gardenias, and then one was the stephanotis. But pretty much people knew in the States that if they needed something, and they all shared really well. Even the growers within Mount Clemens, Floral Avenue, S Makers, Smoke Brothers, Floral Avenue. If you got any sweetheart roses, you know, because you got them, they're just not ready to be cut, and you can't just cut them to cut them. You know, they might look ready, but they're not. They might need 2 more days. So they would just trade off. Yeah, and they would, Joe Vermeulen from Floral Avenue and Paul he was like Paul's second dad. And they solved the problems of the world in the industry all the time. But they were all like that. There was not, even though, Mount Clemens was the biggest, but they all grew, and for local florists and so on. But yeah, if they had a problem with aphids or white fly, they said, what are you using now? Well, we've tried, this isn't working, and they'd share their secrets. They did. They were really good about that.
Good melting pot.
Yeah, it's just a good industry. That's why it's so sad to see it go.
Yeah.
I really lost it. I lost a lot. And it wasn't just the drug cartels. It was losing
Yeah. So
something
that was
really
what was so
important.
bizarre. You know, the government went to them and thinking that they could put a stop to it. So what do? They grow flowers and they grow drugs.
Yeah, I didn't stop the drugs. They're still coming in.
Yeah.
That never stopped.
Yeah.
They just found a new way to make more money. Because they pay very low wages down there. So their people work for nothing.
You can see the buckets here at the end of the.
That's in the sorting room there.
They're grading. Their wood board that the guys made had notches, and they would take the rose and it would hit the little edge of the wood here, and they'd look at it and see where, make sure it was nice and straight, and they snip and put, snip to like as fast as you could see off to the side, and then roll them back in the plastic as you see in those buckets there. And then they go over to the other side, and that's where they get bundled in the wax, and then put back in the cooler.
And then you got a little high school intern kid, sweeps up all the leaves.
With,
So it's everybody's first job that was going to high school. We had a few in our audience on a couple of our presentations. So I worked there.
You can't imagine how much trash comes in. Everybody always says it's so wonderful. No, it's dirty. The business is dirty. But all of that and thorns. I mean, you always had the women always made sure that they had little boot things on because those stems have thorns on them. And you'd be walking up, someone would catch you, and it would
That
carry
always got me,
through.
this picture here, your worker here, how is he holding those without getting stabbed on his arm?
Their arms. You would think they were drug addicts. But they would have a sleeve, a canvas sleeve. You can't see it there. But they wore a guard on their finger.
Wow.
I have some actually at the
Museum.
at the museum there. It's leather on one side and cloth stretchy, and they could slip that on. Paul happened to like a section of hose. He took a rubber hose and cut it and slit it, and he could slip that over. It fit him perfect, and that was your stop, so you didn't cut yourself. You know, some of the guys would use clippers and stuff. Paul liked a knife. He could take a knife with his guard on, go in, go like this, and just go like this and pull the rose right out. The guys that were really good could do that.
And those are the wires that they grow up on to
Yeah.
stay straight.
You see those lines going up and down,
Yeah.
and then it's
They're all
just white string, like kite string, if you will. And one guy on one side, one on the other, and he's flipping it, and the roll goes to him, and then he's coming
Now, the
back.
beds are elevated, right? Because it looks
Yeah,
like
the
it's
beds
starting
are
on
up
top of his boot.
about this high.
Yeah.
And there's pea gravel underneath
Underneath,
there.
okay.
Yeah.
And oh, there's one rose over his head. Now, that's the one he's cutting. I think that's the
Yeah,
one
that's
he's
the one that
cutting.
looks like the one
How
that is.
long that is. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, when you talk about pinching them, or disc bud is what we call that, you go down to where that is. That's where when you pinch, you'll get 2 or 3. And then that's where, you're going down, you're finding where that is, and that's where you're cutting it. That's why you'd have them at different lengths, because some would grow longer before it would produce the flower, some would grow shorter. And that's why it gets exhausted too, because once you keep disc budding, there's all these little knots along the way. That's why that one that was 10 foot was so amazing. It was one straight,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
You can't see it.
And to me, that it was a white rose, it's almost like a message.
Yeah.
It was almost like a message.
God works in mysterious
Yeah, it
ways. He
honestly-
sends us messages.
But we did many, like a couple winters, because it didn't come down right away. And in the spring, we drive by and I go, oh my God, there's a rose, can you see it, can you see it? And just a lone one, just struggling to still be there.
With no heating and
No
no cooling
heating.
or anything, and it survived.
Yeah,
Because once you shut down, you turned off the power plant.
Yeah,
That was it, it was
everything.
over.
everything.
Well, thank you so much for having us
Thank you.
today. And all the kids in the audience, we sit and talk like friends. We do invite you to come up and look at some of this wonderful paper ads and things that Micki's family has kept all these years. Isn't this girl lovely? We wonder if she's still alive. She was at a rose show. She was Flower Girl. That was Miss Connie Hadley of Pleasant Ridge.
Oh, she is from here.
She's from Pleasant Ridge. Isn't she beautiful?
Yeah.
I would love to look her up and see if she's still around.
She's got to be in her, I would say, 80s, maybe.
Would have to be. She was probably
Next time.
late teens. Well, thank you. More of them
So
here.
you live on Ledwick, and what's your address?
Well, doctor from Clemens General.
Yeah, Campbell Ward, yeah.
That was when the first baby was born, when he built the building on Harrington. That was when the
Really?
first baby was born in back 56.
Okay.
That was when that building was built. My sister was born 2 years earlier, the one on Grant.
Oh, yeah, that was his big deal, is he needed to build this new building, and so he worked so hard at it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it made the front page of their AOR, their osteopathic,
Yeah.
they.
Yeah, he was deal, right?
Yeah, about this new hospital, and it was so up to date and everything, yeah. But I wanted to go right there to 43, when,
People that are curious.
We love this too. We're like this too. We love
yeah,
this.
so you just got to really understand everything about it.
Yes,
That's-
yes.
Gives you that chance. And I don't know why, but I think Claude Copeland, who originally built the house, was the foreman at the pottery. And he was
You know, they send out, even our society, Clinton Township, they always put this out over
Good afternoon.
Good
I guess we'll
afternoon.
go ahead and we'll get started. I think I recognize pretty much everybody in the room here, but
This is my daughter, Barb Beverly. She's new here. This is Grace. Hi.
I'm Chris. I'm the president of the museum. So please feel free to check out and see what we've been up to. For those of you that are not aware, next Friday will be the museum's 5th anniversary as a brick and mortar establishment. We have a number of things scheduled for next weekend. Friday is Veterans Day, so we will be open Friday from 10 to 3, and then Saturday and Sunday will be open regular hours. Saturday we're doing a flag retirement ceremony, and we've also been working on a special exhibit of it's titled "Women Throughout the Wars." We've been working with 4 young ladies from Girl Scout Troop 30007 from Warren, and they're doing this as their Silver Award project. And we're having an invitation-only opening for that on Friday evening, and then Saturday it will be open to the public. So it's going to be these young ladies' Silver Project or Silver Award, and it will also be the unveiling of our new the back room that we've been working on to turn into an expansion space. So it's going to be kind of 5-year anniversary of this special exhibit and the opening of our new exhibit room. So come on by and check it out. They've been working really hard. In fact, I gotta go back there and button some things up, so and get some things wrapped up. But yeah, come on by next weekend. Join us for some fun and celebrating our 5 years in this building. This is our fall lecture series. We have one more lecture after this for 2016. It will be in December. It's going to be Dan Heaton talking about Coast Guard on the Great Lakes. And then in January we have one scheduled on the Korean War. And my last piece of advertisement is please take a look at the quilt that's hanging out in the kitchen in the lobby area. We will be raffling that quilt off next Sunday. Tickets are $1 each or 6 for $5. So please buy tickets and help us keep going for another 5 years. So today we are happy to have Lynn Anderson and Micki Weiss presenting the history of the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens. Lynn is a historian and presenter who conducts vintage fashion shows as part of Fashion in the Automobile. And Micki is with the Mount Clemens Downtown Development Authority and wife of Paul Weiss, owner and third generation of Mount Clemens Rose Gardens. Micki has proudly carried on the legacy of the Weiss family since Paul's passing 10 years ago. So let me introduce Lynn Anderson and Micki is behind me. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you. We're pleased to be here today talking about something pretty special for those who lived in the area or maybe remember the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens. Now, as we know, Mount Clemens was known as the Bath City. This was its real handle in the Victorian era, but it was also renowned for its roses. It was often called the Rose Capital. Mount Clemens and nearby Clinton Township was one of the centers of the rose growing industry in the entire country. In fact, it was the largest producer of roses in the state. And one of the most successful we picture here is the Weiss Family, Mount Clemens Rose Gardens. They had over 500,000 roses in production at one time. And before they ceased production in 1999, the Rose Gardens produced in excess of 300 million roses. Think about that. That's one rose for every single person in the United States. That's amazing. And this is the way it looked before they tore the buildings down. There we go. Now the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens were started by Paul Weiss. He was an immigrant from Prussia. He first settled in the Chicago area and then came to the predominantly German community of Mount Clemens at the time, already well known for its rose growers since the 1880s. And in 1920, he partnered with William G. Weaver, Weaver and purchased several established greenhouses from Gustav Schimmel just outside the city limits in Clinton Township, right here. That's at the corner of Cass and Moravia in Clinton Township. He then bought out Weaver 5 years later. Now, the Rose Gardens experienced steady growth throughout the decades, thanks to the popularity of roses for weddings and funerals and other special occasions. Paul married, raised his family. His son Frederick received his master's degree in finance, and he returned to the Rose Gardens. And then his grandson, Paul II, received his bachelor's degree in business administration and eagerly joined the family business too. He learned every aspect of and rotated every single job in preparation for future management with his brothers. Now, one aspect of World War II was a very dark period in our nation's history. After Pearl Harbor, over 127,000 people of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast were forced to relocate and be incarcerated in internment camps located throughout the United States, simply because of their nationality and the fears that they might be a threat to national security. How's that sound familiar with what's going on today, doesn't it? Some scary parallels there, simply of how they looked. Now, many of these people were Nisei Japanese, which is second generation, born and educated here in the United States. Their children were third generation Americans called Sansei, and those who were born in Japan and immigrated were called Issei. But regardless of their origins, all were wrongfully imprisoned. And because they looked like the enemy, they were treated as such. Conditions in the camps were deplorable. You can see one of the pictures here. Look how they're crowded, tar paper shacks. It was no worse than what the Germans were doing across the ocean. They had inadequate food and medical care, harsh environmental conditions. They were in an arid desert community. Many didn't survive, and those that did lost everything upon their return home. Now, like businesses all over the country, the Rose Gardens here were losing valuable workers to the war effort as men and women left to join the armed forces. The rose business was still very busy with all the wartime weddings going on and military funerals. So Weiss began looking for a solution to his manpower dilemma. Now, during this time, Japanese Americans had an excellent reputation for making things grow better than anyone else. Japanese gardeners were famous for meticulously tending gardens and lawns. They picked them clean of every single weed, twig, and pebble. They were also very successful strawberry farmers, as this picture shows. So in 1943, Weiss petitioned the federal government for permission to relocate several Japanese American families who were interned at the camps. He promised the government he would vouch for them, bring them to Michigan, give them jobs in his greenhouses, and help them regain their dignity. So thanks to the Weiss family, dozens of families were rescued from these deplorable camps and brought to live and work in Mount Clemens at the Rose Gardens. They lived in homes, they lived in apartments, hotels throughout the area, and their children all went to Mount Clemens schools. It's a credit to the citizens of Mount Clemens that these families assimilated into the neighborhoods without any incidents. At a time when our country chose to segregate these people because of how they looked, the people of this community embraced these families and welcomed them with open arms. Doesn't that give you chills? I love that. Here's several Japanese workers. That's a sorting room, I believe.
Yep.
They're sorting the roses there, getting them ready for shipping. Now, while here, the Japanese Americans even formed a baseball team. They won the Recreational League Baseball Championship in 1947. Now, these actions helped foster increased community cohesiveness between the two cultures. And to this day, the Weiss family enjoys the friendship of those employees and their descendants, some of whom stayed here and others who moved back to California. And here's Paul II talking with several of his Japanese workers. This is what the 70s looks like?
Yeah.
Given the mustache on Paul, I think that's the 70s.
So they stayed on, huh?
Many of them did. Now one employee, this gentleman here, this is George Segarra, and he stayed and he worked in the Rose Gardens for over 40 years. He taught young Paul how to grow roses, but more importantly, he taught him about respect and honor and a strong work ethic. It stayed with Paul his entire life. And every year on New Year's Day, the Weiss family would spend the day with the Segarra family. And George's son even joined the military after Korea, became a lieutenant colonel in our armed forces, and married a girl and settled down and raised their family. Now, after World War II, the Rose Gardens continued their prominence in the industry, achieving a national reputation. During the Gerald Ford administration, they dealt directly with the White House floral staff, making daily shipments of roses to Washington, D.C., and seen in the White House there. They were used in floral arrangements, state dinners, and public areas throughout the White House. And local growers represented the city in the international rose shows and floral exhibitions, and they even shipped flowers to the Internment Roses Parade out in Pasadena. And in 1993, they were honored with the Michigan Floral Association Grower of the Year Award. Now, commercial rose growing is a real refined art. Each plant has a productive life of just 4 years. That's it. They begin producing flowers in as little as 6 weeks after planting, but that won't do. For the best quality, the gardeners pinch off the buds for the first 3 months of the plant's life. This allows, before allowing flowers to bloom. This basically makes them sturdier plants. A crop of flowers takes 8 weeks to produce. Now they can control that time for peak seasons. They can by boosting the heat and humidity in the greenhouses. So there are ways that they can control that. Mary is misting the plants and gathering. Now besides the monumental task of planting, cultivating, pruning, spraying, and watering roses, the climate has to be controlled. Where are we? We're in Michigan with winters, very strong winters. Well, this necessitates large heating plants. The greenhouse must be kept at a constant night temperature of 60 to 64 degrees to produce marketable flowers. So at the time, at the Rose Gardens here, Paul II built a power plant large enough to heat a home of 300 homes, or a town of 300 homes. The original fuel was coal, but his plant, when she built in 1969, switched to fuel oil. Cost $500,000 a year to operate, but provided cleaner heat and required fewer workers. The greenhouses were all glass, so it's like heating a house with all windows in the winter. And of course then in the summer, the hot sun baking into the glass. This necessitates sprinklers and overhead misting pipes and ventilation systems to keep the gardens from overheating. And in fact, there's Paul II behind his father Frederick. Look how deep those greenhouses went. Now interesting, the Rose Gardens utilize the nearby Clinton River for irrigation, returning it back to the river after use, what a typical farmer might do. When pollution control became an issue, the Michigan Pollution Control Board checked the quality of the water. They found that the water coming out of the plant was cleaner than what went in. So the Rose Gardens were green before being green became a popular and trendy buzzword. Amazing what they did. Sadly, the end was on the horizon. No one saw it coming. In 1991, the United States enacted the Andean Trade Preference Act. This eliminated tariffs on products from Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Now, the objective was to strengthen the legal industries in these countries as alternatives to the drug production and trafficking that was going on. But it had the reverse effect. It turned drug growers into flower growers. The exportation of cheap cut flowers from these countries rose dramatically, and within 10 years, killed the American cut flower industry. According to Paul, this country went from 5,500 cut flower greenhouses, 300 of which were rose growers, to just 600 cut flower greenhouses, less than 100 of which were rose growers, in under 10 years. Today, virtually all roses today that you see anywhere are imported from Colombia and Ecuador. Everything. Now, the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens finally closed their doors in 1999 after 80 years as a leader in the industry. In their heyday, they ranked 8th in production in the United States, and they produced over 6 million roses annually from their greenhouses covering 10 acres along the Clinton River in Clinton Township, just outside of Mount Clemens. The acreage now is being developed as a subdivision, appropriately called Rose Garden Estates. However, not before Paul donated the framework of one of the last remaining greenhouses to the Greater Clinton Township Historical Society for preservation. So in 2011, funds were raised and it was erected as an open-air pergola right on the grounds of the historical village. It's now a garden destination for weddings and photographers. A lot of children had their senior pictures taken in there this year. A plaque inside, way at the back, you can't see it from here, but way at the back, it honors the contributions of the Mount Clemens Rose Gardens and the Weiss family, ensuring their legacy for generations to come. And they are planting more roses around it than what we had when I took that picture. So thank you for coming, and now I'm going to introduce Micki Weiss. This is Paul's wife. And she has brought a number of pieces here and has some incredible stories to tell about what it was like to actually work in the gardens.
Thank you so much. It's a joy for me. I get emotional because it was so important to my husband. He was very passionate about it. And one of the things when he did lectures was to always ask anyone in the audience if they knew someone or if they themselves ever worked in the rose gardens or in the pottery, because those were entry-level jobs for kids 15, 16 years old in high school and so on, and usually someone in the audience did know someone or they themselves were employed there. But it was truly a passion for their family. This particular story, they never really spoke about very much, and I never quite understood it because I felt it was something they should be really proud of. And Lynn was so kind to write this amazing article that triggered us traveling around and doing presentations about this, because I think it's something we as Americans can be proud of as we know what's going on in the country today. I've talked to many people who were actually in Mount Clemens when the Japanese families arrived by bus, came across the stone bridge, if you remember the bridge there on Cass Avenue, and were applauded as they arrived. Paul's father had built an apartment building right on the facility. As Lynn said, there were hotels within the city that were used as well. And they were really well received. I've talked to many people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s that were here, and their children went to school with them, and there was absolutely no problem. And it's just a sad day when you think that we chose to take these families away from their livelihood and put them someplace because they were different. It was an amazing journey for the Weiss family. They became family friends. As Lynn said, every Christmas they would eat the traditional food. Gifts were given to the family. It was an amazing journey for them. And I think today, if people would just take a moment and reflect on our history, not just this, but also what happened to the Germans, we need to stop that. We're all human beings, and we all have a right to live our lives. And unfortunately, some people think if you look different, you should have a different way of living, and it's just so unfair. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the greenhouses. When you're seeing them like this, that is obviously when it was summer. Would you click to the next one? Because I wanted where you show the...
To back up.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe go back.
No, that's all right.
The shot that I believe was the second shot looks
the old
like
aerial shot?
the greenhouses in the summer here have to be shaded to help keep the heat from getting into the greenhouses. So someone has to go out there and paint that all on there to help act as a protective cover. The vents become really important because when you're trying to hold the temperature and trying to keep the humidity, there's a mildew issue. So the vents become really important. there was someone at the greenhouse 24 hours a day, someone. At night, off to the downcast a little bit, you will see there was a house, that was the foreman, and there were alarms. When the alarms would go off, they would also go off in our home. And the phone would ring, and it was all computerized back in the 90s, and a voice would let us know what area there was a problem, and exactly, you know, where Paul needed to head to take care of that. Because as Lynn was saying, you could lose an entire crop. Valentine's Day was always a challenge for the family because of the weather. You never knew, snow, could get warm. And so right after Christmas, and back in the day, Christmas was a huge rose giving holiday. So you had a very short period of time to get the roses ready again for Valentine's Day. I know this, I was in the florist industry back when I was a co-op student in the mid-60s. We did sell a lot more roses. By the time I owned my own shop in the late 70s and early 80s, poinsettias kind of took over, but roses were a big flower during the holidays. But Valentine's Day was always the challenge. And there was a time when the alarm went off. We were in the midst of a blizzard, and Paul had to get to the greenhouses, and there was snow this deep in our driveway. And I told him I didn't want him to have a heart attack, so I was shoveling, trying to get 2 ribbons to get them out, and I said I would quickly follow. The problem being everything was closed, every Lowe's, every Home Depot, there was nothing that was open, and they needed plywood, and they needed it bad, because the weight of the snow, when it rests on the peaks, when you get the heat coming underneath, it forms a layer of ice, so it makes it even heavier. Sometimes it would slide down and get
Those ice dams and gutters, basically.
in the gutters, exactly. You could literally hear it weeping and creaking, and they all had hard hats on because when the glass breaks, I mean, it could go right through your skull. So getting up on those roofs, I happened to follow that snowstorm. I was about an hour behind them, and when I pulled up and I saw these guys all up on the roof, I was thinking, oh my God, they're gonna fall through. They took every piece of wood they could find anywhere to just cover the holes. They were acting as a chimney. So all the hot air was just blowing out through, and the boilers were pumping out as fast as they could to protect that crop, because it was Valentine's Day, it was within 8 days. So there's times where it was fun, and there were times where it was really difficult. In summer, the temperatures would be in the range of 115, 120 degrees. So they would start at 4 and 5 in the morning so that they could get the guys out of the greenhouse by noon. Because of the heat, it would be just so hot. But the flowers, at that time, the heads would pop a little quicker. So they weren't quite the same size head on the roses that you would get during other times of the year. And the pinching that Lynn was talking about created more volume on each rose bush. But when you think of how many plants were in there, that was done by hand, because you had to see and know which ones to pinch to make them produce more. So it was a real challenge. They also grew gardenias and stephanotis. They were one of the largest gardenia growers in the region. One entire house was my favorite house to go in, because it always, you could just, the smell was heavenly. You either love gardenias or you hate them. But they were just beautiful. The stephanotis house, there was a gentleman that worked for the company. He was 85 years old. He had retired 3 times, and in his 3rd retirement party, Paul said he wasn't going to give him another party. But he tried to retire, but he'd always come back. And very interesting, that house, the base of the stephanotis plants were like trunks of trees. They were so old. And when you walked in, it was about a 10-foot ceiling, and then every 12, 15 feet, there was a square, 4-foot cut in a ladder that was permanently there. And he would climb up there, and that is a sight to see. I wish no one ever took a photograph, but it was a field of stephanotis, which is a small waxy flower used a lot in bridal work. And that also had a wonderful scent. But that gentleman, up through his 80s, would climb up there every day and pick those stephanotis, and no one else. He was the only stephanotis and gardenia houseworkers exclusively, and he did an incredible job.
Tell the story of the rose, the last rose.
The last rose, they were already closed down, and that picture. Oh, it's right in front of me. This is a photograph of Paul holding this rose. We saw it peeking through the greenhouse. So when Paul went to the house, went back into the house, he discovered this was a stem, was not pinched. So this was not one that had been pinched back. So it was 10 foot from the ground, straight up through one of the glass panes was broken out. So they went in and wanting to preserve it, get it out, they asked me, do you think we can get it out in one piece? And I go, we can try, because there's grids in the greenhouse. Every about foot, maybe 14 inches, there's a wire frame that comes down, and then a man would stand on one side, another on this side, and they would create this grid, little squares. And it was a job for someone to go through and make sure one wasn't kind of doing one of these, where you had to bring him back, make sure he stayed so that the stems would be straight. So getting this rose out, we had to cut that all around it. And the guys cut it, and 3 of them went, and we just kept kind of guiding them and just kept going, just keep going until we got it out, and then we raised it up, and they carried it out through the greenhouse. Keep in mind, there's some 90-degree turns. And we kept saying, don't bend in, because it wouldn't take on water. Once we got it in the grading room, we took a 5-gallon bucket with warm water, put some Floral Life in it, and we gave it a good cut, and they're like, what do you think? I go, it's a long way to go, but let's see what happens. That rose lasted 3 weeks, and it was white. It was the most beautiful white rose, and unfortunately, our overzealousness to get it out, we said, we got a call, Guinness World Book of Records, and when we called, they said, we'll send a photographer up. You can't touch anything. They needed to come first and photograph it and film it, so that they can prove in fact that it was there. We messed up, but we didn't know. But we always said if we ever had a chance again, we don't do anything. Call them first. But we know in our hearts that it was probably the longest stem rose that we joked about. Who would produce a box to put it in? Yeah, that was survival. That flower wasn't ready to give up. And even after the Rose Gardens was gone, the winter after and so on, the spring, there were some that were coming up.
Some I think still randomly grow along the river even to this day.
Yeah.
If you walk along there, you'll see them.
They sold many of the plants,
We
we had a sale, and we were amazed. It was, for my husband, it was wonderful because he heard so many great stories from so many people about what it meant to their family, for them to be there. Their family gave roses to a lot of nonprofits when they had events and things. But to hear the stories from people, and I am fortunate enough to still hear them because people tell me, they're still growing, I'm still getting flowers from them. And they had to take every one of those plants, shake off all the dirt. It's kind of strange. They look like, who would buy this? They cut off the tops and then the roots, cut them. So you're handing someone what looks like a bundle of sticks. But Paul said, this is the end that goes in the ground. And amazingly, people bought dozens at a time and different colors. And it was a chore to get them out. I mean, to thousands of them that they took out. And every day, people just came through and wanted a piece of history. So it was
We
really
need roses in this area. That's where you went. My dad bought my mom roses there and said they would last over a month. Today you buy that stuff at Costco or wherever from Columbia. They've been cut for weeks and they're gone within 6-7 days.
Yes.
And there's no scent. You know, the stuff you buy today, there's no smell. It's like freezer burn.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Explain how they do it today.
Well, how they do it is just that they cut them when they're really, really tight. And a lot of people don't understand. some of those pictures you saw, the rose gardens, they would cut 2 and 3 times a day. You'd be surprised what 4 or 5 hours makes a difference in a flower that's not quite ready.
Some
and
are
a
open,
flower
you
that-
know,
that
they're not
is.
all tight buds, they're open.
But when, then they get graded as to what length the stems are and so on. But when they come from Colombia, they get cut and they're what they call cold pack. They put them in suspended animation, they put them all in coolers. So sometimes you'll notice on the end of the stem, it's black. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, it's pickling. They pickled them to make them last longer. And we, here in the US, we never would do anything like that because the roses were being cut and grown, whether it was here in Mount Clemens or California, where they did a lot of rose growing. They never pickled flowers. So once they get them in these cold packs, then they've got to, get to an airport, and then they got to get on an airplane, and then they got to get here, and then they go through customs here. I myself personally, when I had my flower shop, I had a wedding with calla lilies, and I ordered straight cases of white callas. And when the boxes came, I had holes all over these boxes. And when I opened them, right through my stems, right through my flower heads, and I had a wedding, and I called the grower, and he apologized. He said, we'll overnight as quickly as we can. And I said, what? They would take these steel rods, and they would run them through the boxes on the sides, on the top, and to see if they could feel bags of cocaine and heroin, because they could actually feel that. And there was a florist shop actually in the early 80s that got a shipment of carnations that was filled with cocaine. They opened up the box and there were carnations laying on the top and underneath that. And so it does.
Flower life.
Yeah, kind of flower life. But once the flowers got here, if they didn't pick them up right away off of the docks, my husband's family stopped having shipments flown in, and they actually had contracts with trucking companies from California and Florida. And they got here quicker because it says perishable, do not overheat, they don't pay any attention to that. Sometimes you get a case and the open up and one whole side would be stuck to the cardboard because they might have been someplace where it was warm, but they kept opening and closing the door and cold air would blow in, and it just like wind chill factor, it would make the side of the box, and sometimes those flowers on that edge would be frozen. But with their flowers, when you get them here, because when I had my shop, a lot of the rose gardens